Welcome to this Saturday, November 27th episode of the DaveCast. Have you got your Christmas decorations up yet? I don't know about you all, but we actually have had our Christmas decorations up for a couple of weeks now. And I do think it seems to be a trend this year. I've noticed a lot of posts and discussions about putting it up early on Facebook and social media. And so I think people are putting it out early this year because 2020 of all years, we really need Christmas, right? Would you agree? We really need Christmas. But I want to suggest to you that as much as we need Christmas this year, we need this season of Advent. We need this intentional time of waiting and preparation, of spiritual centering and of renewal. We need to feel the gravity of the weight, the angst of knowing that this world is not as it should be, and the longing for things to be made right in Christ so that we might wake up on Christmas morning this year with a newfound hope that has grown out of this season of spiritual preparation. And so, beginning today and for the next 12 episodes of the DaveCast, from now till Thursday, December 24th, which is Christmas Eve, I'm going to be focusing on the scriptures and themes of the season of Advent. And so, in preparation for that, this 12-part study, I'm going to begin today with a little background, a little history of just how, when, and why this season of Advent came to be. Now, it's actually impossible to determine the exact earliest dating because we don't have a lot of information about it until about the 4th century. But what seems to have happened is over the course of the first centuries of the Christian church that Easter and Christmas became the two more or less fixed celebrations in the life of the church. And where in the calendar Easter came to be made a great deal of sense because it was related and tied into the Jewish celebration of the Passover. But there was at some point, and we don't know exactly when, that Christmas began to be celebrated on December 25th. And by the way, no one believes that Jesus was actually born on December 25th. But the thinking is that there was already something of a holiday for the Roman world, a celebration of the winter solstice, which is the darkest and shortest day of the year. And so this time, as the dark days began to get lighter and lighter, that it made sense for Christians to begin to celebrate the coming of the light of the world in Jesus Christ. And so, once Easter and Christmas became fixed on the church calendar, those two celebrations kind of became the horizons of so much of the church year. The first half toward Easter and then the second half toward Christmas. And so it seems to have been only natural, of course, that several weeks before each of these big dates begin to take on new significance. You're moving day by day, week by week, closer to the big date. And so what developed was the season of Lent before Easter and Advent before Christmas. And that really is all it is. Advent is the marking of the days as we get closer and closer to the commemoration or the celebration of the birth of our Savior. The earliest real date that we have occurs on 380 AD at the Council of Saragossa, which is in present-day Spain. And it was there that they had this sort of a recommendation or recognition of something, but that it was kind of a doubling down on something that was already there. They weren't creating it out of thin air. There was already some kind of observance of Advent that had already gone on. And so what does the word Advent mean? Well, it comes from the Latin word adventus, and that word is a Latin translation of a word found in Greek, the Greek New Testament, parousia, which originally meant the arrival of a king or a royalty. And from there in the early church, it came to refer to the coming arrival or glorious entrance of the Lord. And so the word parousia, and by extension adventus, refers to two things. First of all, the coming of Christ himself in the human flesh, what we call the incarnation, but also the coming again of Christ, what we call today the second coming. And so to honor or celebrate this in historic practice, Advent originally had 2 weeks set aside to reflect on the fact that Christ will come again, that all things will be restored on earth as they are in heaven. And then 2 weeks were set aside to focus on the first coming of Christ, the one in the manger. And so that is pretty much what is going on in the lectionary scriptures. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on during this series over the next few weeks. You might find it interesting that some of our favorite and most beloved Advent practices are actually fairly new, relatively speaking, in terms of 2,000 years of the Christian church. First of all, the Advent wreath. And you know the 4 candles we light each Sunday leading up to Christmas. And Christmas Eve, we light the center candle or the Christ candle. Well, where that comes from is there was this German pastor named Johann Heinrich Weikern. And he founded an orphanage in Hamburg in 1833. And so during the weeks leading up to Christmas, the children, like children tend to do, they were very excited about Christmas, and they would ask him, how much longer is till Christmas? And so to make the wait easier, Weikern came up with the Advent wreath, and he said that he made his first Advent wreath out of an old cartwheel with candles on it. Now, the Advent calendar, which I think has become more and more popular, it also came from Germany. In the earliest 20th century, a man named Gerhard Lang started printing Advent calendars. Apparently, when he was a little boy, his mother had made him a homemade calendar with 24 small candies, each attached to cardboard, one for each day before Christmas. And so it's interesting that both these things were created for kids, for children, to help with the waiting and the counting down of the days till Christmas. And so, these two things that we have, the Advent wreath and the Advent calendar, they can also help us in our waiting as we count down the days till Christmas. And so waiting and learning to wait is very important, right? I was thinking about this and how if we've learned anything from this year, particularly from our initial months of social distancing and sheltering in place, it was the simple truth that waiting for something without a set endpoint can be excruciating, right? Waiting for something without a set endpoint can be excruciating. At the same time, that kind of waiting, unknown, can help us appreciate things that are certain in our lives. And so now as we enter this season of Advent, this last waiting period of 2020, a year, quite frankly, that most people would probably just rush to finish, I do hope we won't rush through these days, because it's the very best kind of waiting that we'll do all year long. And it has a defined endpoint. Think of someone like Abraham, who was given this great promise that he'll be the father of many nations, even though he's a very old man and his wife is a very old woman. And God makes this promise. And then for years, Abraham has to wait. And he gets even older, and his wife gets even older. And it seems like the longer he has to wait, that the promise becomes less and less likely. But he continues to wait and to trust. And Abraham and so many other biblical characters are examples of how we have to learn to put ourselves on God's timetable, in God's frame of reference, not on our own. All of this, I think, is deeply inscribed in the biblical way of approaching God, by learning to wait and get our lives on God's time. And so during this season of Advent, we're all called into entering this kind of space, these waiting rooms, if you will. When the angel appeared to Mary and then later Joseph, proclaiming tidings of great joy, there was this kind of seeming insanity that God was promising to do this thing. But they both trusted in God's words, and that trust developed in those 9 months of waiting. It eventually took them to Bethlehem, to Egypt and beyond. I mean, it took Mary from the serenity of a stable to the pain at the foot of the cross to the celebration and joy of the empty tomb and the glorious resurrection. As she waited and trusted, waiting and trusting. Tomorrow, as we begin the season of Advent at Conyers First, we'll be online only. And I don't like it, and I'm hoping and praying the numbers go down to the point that we can return to in-person worship. But that's what it is right now. And so we're waiting to see. I don't know what your life has been like this year, but I've spent way too much time in this room, which is my studio/office, where I've prepared sermons, I've done Zoom calls, I've edited and uploaded our online worship services, and of course done the DaveCast here. This, by the way, is the 99th episode today. hundredths next Tuesday. But down the hall in the room, there's a room where my wife has taught school online to first graders most of this year. And I tell you, as I listen to her teach, I tell her all the time, her job is harder than mine. I don't know how she does it. And so one of the pervading questions we have, and I think we've all had this year, is when will our lives ever return to normal? But here's the thing for all of us, pandemic or no pandemic, for all of us who follow Jesus, God is not calling us to a normal life, but rather calling us to trust in something extraordinary so that our lives might serve a higher purpose. You know, this world is not as it should be. And while we may feel the harshness of waiting in the wilderness more deeply this year, the same ageless truth remains constant. We are waiting on an imperfect and broken world to pass. And the season of Advent reminds us that no matter who we are or where we are in time or space, all earthly things will come to an end. And to remember that all things here on earth are temporary. You know, we work to embody God's patience here and love here in this world. And so we wait. And as we wait through this season, I hope you'll join me on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays at noon as we explore the scriptures together and prepare for Christmas Day. But for now, on this day, I'm going to go get ready for our online service tomorrow at 11. And so in the meantime, you keep bringing the hope, and I will see you then. Okay? God bless you.